Hey there, fourth grade. Today we are going to be on page 313. This is lesson 8-6, compare fractions. And we're going to say I can use equivalent fractions to compare fractions. And last time that's what we were working on was equivalent fractions. We've been talking about benchmark fractions, all sorts of different things in order for us to start to figure out what these different ones are. Well, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at how to use math to compare different types of fractions. So before we get in to our lesson today, I'm going to zoom out a little bit and use my whiteboard here because there are some really important things that we're going to be talking about today that you've got to understand and know before we can get working on different ones. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start off. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure it's not here. I'm going to go ahead and start off drawing a rectangle, right? And so if I've got my rectangle and I cut it into two equal parts, right? All right. And I'm going to shade one of them. Well, when we write our fraction, there's two parts to the fraction, right? And our top part, do you remember what that's called? If so, just say it quietly to yourself. What's the top part of a fraction called? It's the numerator. The numerator. All right. Our numerator goes up on top, and that means how many are shaded in. So here I've got one shaded in, right? What's the bottom part of a fraction? Do you remember that word? That vocabulary word is denominator. Denominator. And the denominator tells me how many pieces does it take to make a whole of whatever the shape. So our rectangle here, how many pieces would I need to make a whole? Well, I'd need 1, 2. So my denominator here would be 2. All right. So we've talked before about equivalent fractions. Equivalent fractions. And equivalent fractions just say this. They say if I've got the same size, right? And I've got the same amount shaded in. So here, all right, what's my fraction? Well, my numerator is how many are shaded, so that would be 2. And then how many does it take to make a whole? 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So my denominator would be 4. These are equivalent fractions, all right? So one way that we can always compare is to find a common denominator. All right. The denominator is on bottom. And so what can I do? Well, if I wanted to compare these and have them be the same, well, I would just make more of these little ones, right? And so I'm going to times the denominator by 2. And we talked about this phrase before. Anything I do to my denominator, I have to do to my numerator, right? And so, well, what does that actually mean? Well, that means I times each of these, I cut them all in half. How many do I have now? 1, 2, 3, 4. And how many are shaded? 1, 2. And so that's how I can tell, oh, these are going to be equivalent fractions. All right. Now, let me flip it around. Now we're going to talk about a different way that we can compare. All right. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start with my 1/2. All right. So here's my 1/2. So one way is for us to get the same denominator and then compare. The other way for me to do it is to compare numerators. All right. So in this case, I have 1/4. All right. I have 1/4. Now, I don't need to cut this into more pieces, right? When I have the same numerator, in this case, they are both the number 1. My denominator tells me which is greater. So I have 1/2 and I've got 1/4. All right. My denominator tells me because the less times that my whole is cut up, the smaller the denominator, the bigger the pieces are. So if I took my chocolate bar, let's just call these chocolate bars, right? If I took my chocolate bar and I broke it into 2 pieces, well, those are some pretty big pieces, right? But if I took that same chocolate bar and broke it into 4ths, This piece is smaller. So which one of these is greater? Well, the one that has bigger pieces, right? The bigger pieces. And I know that because the numerators are the same. So I just look and say, well, the smaller number on the denominator will tell me that answer. All right. And that's what we're going to be looking at as we get started today on page 314 is comparing numbers using this type of math. So let's go ahead and take a look at page 314. All right, so here we are on page 314. And it says Isabella's father is building a model dinosaur with small pieces of wood. Compare the length of the pieces of wood. Compare 1/4 of an inch and 5/6 inch. Then compare 4/5 of an inch and 4/10 of an inch. And it says you can compare these fractions because they refer to the same whole, which is an inch. These are all parts of an inch, right? So we're going to compare some of these different numbers together. So let's go ahead and slide down here to box B. It says compare 1/4 and 5/6 by renaming the fractions so they both have, underline this with me, the same denominator. The same denominator. All right. They need to have the same denominator. So how do we do that? Well, we're starting with 1/4 and 5/6. And I say, well, what is something that I can multiply and get to be my answer here? And I go, well, I can multiply to get to a 12, and I know 6 can be times to be 12 too, right? So anything I do to my denominator, I hope you're starting to say it with me, I have to do to my numerator. So 4 times 3 equals 12. 1 times 3 equals 3. So 3/12. All right. Over here, I knew that 6 times 2 is 12. And anything I do to my denominator, I hope you said it with me, I have to do to my numerator, right? So 5 times 2. So now here are the two numbers that I'm going to compare. And because they have the same denominator, I can just look at the numerator and say which one is bigger. All right. Which one's bigger? Well, 10 is bigger than 3. So my alligator would want to eat that. All right. And since these are equivalent fractions, 3/12 is the same as 1/4. Okay. And 10/12 is the same as 5/6, right? So if the alligator wants to eat the bigger number and these are equivalent and these are equivalent, then that would mean that 5/6 is bigger than 1/4. All right. We just had to get the common denominator, and then we can just look at the tops and say, hey, which is bigger? Okay. Here's another way for us to do it using a number line. So here they've got all the way up to 1. All right. And what they've done here is they've written out all of our tenths. So they took our 1 and they broke it into 10 equal parts. All right. And then up on top, they took this and broke it into 5 equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? So we can look at 4/5 and 4/10. Well, 4/5 is all the way over here. 4/10 is all the way over here. Do you remember earlier what I said to you? When our numerators are the same, the smaller denominator means there's bigger pieces. So 4/5, the fifths are bigger pieces. Take a look at that. Those are some big pieces. When we go to 1/5 compared to 1/10, it's a lot bigger. So when we go all the way over to 4/5 compared to 4/10, well, I can see that it's further along. So 4/5 is greater than 4/10. All right. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at page 315. All right. So here's 315. And now when I'm working on page 315, I'll write that up here just in case you're a little confused. All right. This is what this part's saying. When two fractions have the same numerators, the fraction with the smaller denominator is greater. So when we compare 3/4 and 6/10, all right, well, what did we do first? They said, you know what? Let's go ahead and divide 6 divided by 2 to give us our numerator of 3. And anything I do to my numerator, I have to do the denominator, right? So I've got 3/5. So now we're asking, all right, well, if I've got 3/5 and I've got 3/5, fourths, we've both got 3's here, right? I had to get them to be the same. On the other page, we chose to multiply to get the same denominator. This time we're saying, let's just get the same numerator. All right. And when I do that, I go, well, 4 is a smaller number, which means the pieces are bigger than fifths. So that's going to tell me right now that 3/4 is bigger than 3/5. And what was our equivalent fraction that we started with? It was 6/10. So what does that tell us when we compare 3/4 and 6/10? It tells us that 3/4 is bigger than 6/10. So when you're comparing fractions, we just have to have one of those things be the same. We either need to have the same numerators or the same denominators. It's got to be one or the other, but you've got to have something the same for us to be able to compare them. All right. We can also use that number line to go ahead and place different parts on here, which we're actually going to get to try in just a moment. So come on down here. We're going to skip number 2 for right now and jump over here to number 3. For number 3, I've got 1/4 and I've got 1/10. And I'm going to ask you real quick to compare. Well, our numerators, what do you notice? They are the same, right? They are the same. So if my numerators are the same, then that means that the smaller denominator has bigger pieces, right? So which of these two numbers has smaller denominator? Well, that'd be fourths. So the alligator wants to eat that. Okay. And if you're not sure, you're like, I don't know if that makes that much sense. Think about it like a pizza. Would you rather have 1/4 of a pizza? All right, so that's a whole quarter of a pizza. Or would you rather have, yikes, this is going to be tough. Hold on. Or would you rather have like one smaller pizza over there, right? It's going to be the one that's bigger, the fourth, because it's got bigger slices. Take a look at number 5. For number 5, I've got 1/2 and I've got 4/5. Sheesh. All right, well, how do I get one of these things to be the same? Well, 1 is easy. Whenever I see I have 1 in my numerator or denominator, I can quickly multiply it to be the same as the other one. So 1 times what will get me to have 4, so then I can compare my numerators. 1 times 4, right? But anything I do to my numerator, I really hope you're going, Mr. Campbell, you say this all the time. I have to do to my denominator, right? All right, so what's my new equivalent fraction? 4 times 1 is 4. And 4 times 2 is 8. So if I have 4/8 over here, and I've got 4/5 over here, which way is the alligator going to want to bite? If you're not sure, look back up here. Why did we choose 1/4 instead of 1/10? Because when our numerators were the same, the smaller denominator has bigger pieces. Here, my numerators are the same, so which one has the smaller denominator? The alligator would want to eat over here. All right. All right, I'm going to have you pause your video. I want you to work on number 2 and number 4 real quick for me. You can decide whether you want to try to get the same numerator or denominator. I'll show you the quickest way in just a moment. Pause your video, work on number 2 and number 4. All right, I hope that you were able to work on those. If you haven't, pause now so you can go ahead and try it out. Well, if I've got 3/4 and I've got 6/8, all right, well, I know that I can times 3 by 2 to get to 6, and that'll give me common numerators. But anything I do to my numerator, I've got to do to my denominator, right? So 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 4 is 8. All right, so my numerators are now the same. So which of my denominators is smaller? 8 or 8? Wait, what? My numerators are the same and my denominators are the same, which means this is equal. 3/4 is equal to 6/8. Excuse me. All right. Now, when I take a look at number 4, I've got 3/5 and I've got 5/10. Well, there's a lot of 5s going on here, but I can see that I can multiply this 5 to get to a 10, right? So 5 times 2. And anything I do to my denominator, I have to do to my numerator. All right. 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times 6, 2 times 3 is 6. Sorry, gave it away there. All right, my denominators are now the same. So which one is greater, 6 or 5? 6. The alligator would want to eat the 6. All right. All right, come on down here with me real quick. All right. For number 6 and then number 7, they've given you a number line to use as you're comparing. All right. So the first one I see 7/8. Well, they've already cut it into eighths for me, so that's going to be right here, right? And now I need to put on my 3/4 up on the top. All right. Well, I know that 1/2 of the equivalent fraction for 1/2 is 4/8. All right. So that's 1/2. And then I need to cut each of those halves in half to create my fourth. And I know that because 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So here is 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and then 1 whole would be 4/4. So if I've got my 3/4, it's right here. My 7/8 is right here. Which of those is further along? Well, the 7/8. So my alligator would want to eat over there. All right. You've got one more number line, and then they want you to find either a common numerator or a common denominator. You get to pick. But that is how we can accomplish all of this. All right. We want to make sure whatever we do to the numerator, we do to the denominator. Whatever we do to the denominator, we have to do to the numerator. All right, 4th grade, that's all we've got for today. I hope that you are starting to feel pretty confident in your skills in finding equivalent fractions, comparing fractions, and of course, using those benchmark fractions as well. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and we will see you next time. Have a good one.